Welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and tonight I am experiencing a scarcity of clever intro ideas for our chat with this nerd.
That's all right. I forgive you. Nerdarchy Dave here from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. How are you doing tonight?
Great! Another fantastic Monday, start to a new, fresh week. Got some cool Nerdarchy stuff done, and here we are chatting about D&D stuff. Kind of a difficult topic. It's not a game-specific term. It's also like every time I was thinking about it, it's almost like defined by its opposite, which was last week's topic of abundance. It's just like, it's the
Honestly,
lack of that.
so scarcity to me in gaming, that just makes me think of a specific playstyle. Like, if you're playing post-apocalyptic, if you're playing Dark
Oh, sure.
Sun, if you're playing a game that's super heavy in resource management, that's
Mm-hmm.
my go-to. And Fifth Edition is not really great for those style games, without some modding,
Yeah.
because especially the magic system, right? Like, I mean, oh, there's no food, but you have a druid or ranger in the party. Goodberry, right?
Yeah.
Like, not a problem.
Create food and water once you get a little higher level. I think that's a
Yeah,
second level spell. And while by raw, it's just like tasteless gruel, basically, or tofu.
yeah.
It's still like mechanically satisfies the need to eat.
Like, I know, like
It's
druid.
certainly food is what it is most often associated with. Even in D&D, like if you search D&D Beyond for scarcity, almost all the things that hit back is like the food, related to food explicitly, like even in the little blurb that you can see the results.
Well, also, like, I mean, you could also look at it from, depending on how. Like, we've gotten away from these style games, but in the early days, like, you tracked everything.
Yeah.
Did you fire an arrow? Mark it down. Did you recover that arrow? Mark it down.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
yeah. Even rations, it was
yeah.
like 10 days rations was, I think, like the standard, equipment
And
list.
now I feel like in our games, nobody cares. Like, to me, it's not very exciting. Unless you're playing a very specific type of game. Like, I guess if you were playing like a hex crawl and like,
Yeah.
you don't have the ability to restock, and like your ranger better have be a Boyer Fletcher because he's gonna need to make his arrows.
Right. Well, although that was part of what I've been thinking about, regards to this topic all week too, is like part of for me, a lot of that kind of stuff is more interesting in the games I play these days, and whether that's the system or just me, it is because when they come up in games, it's often like not mechanical. It's just like something the group agreed upon that would be cool for this campaign. So
Yeah.
everybody just sort of leans into that, right? I mean, we've played games not necessarily like food related, but we played Maximum Apocalypse, and it's just like which does have a mechanical element, but also just from a role playing perspective, like when we got our hands on bullets, it's like I know there's not a lot of bullets, so I'm not just going to go willy nilly. And food would be the same thing in a game. If you had a good group of role players and you decided ahead of time, like let's play a game where like food is scarce and you need to think about that.
I think like more modern games, even when they include those elements, they tend to be a bit better in design, a little bit more elegant, so
Yeah, yeah, sure.
they're
I mean,
not
mechanically.
they're not quite the pain in the ass of old. Like Maximum Apocalypse was a good example of that with the scavenge and salvage
Yes,
rules in that game, where it's like instead of being like you got to find these specific things,
yes,
it was
yes.
just an amorphous resource that you did have
Yeah,
to be
like
hard to
units. I
find.
think it were just like scrap units or whatever it was called,
Yeah, and
which
then
kind of contributed to role playing too, because in a purely mechanical sense, it's like I have 5 widgets and it takes 3 widgets to make
yeah,
makeshift armor. But through role playing, it's like yeah, but I know as a player that was from like an old hubcap and a traffic cone and whatever a piece of drywall or something. So you can kind of incorporate it into the role playing and story that way too.
so Vasgrim has a little bit of it too because it's
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of an OSR game and like it's very rules light for mechanics, but those games tend to lean a little more heavily on your equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're using energy weapons, they're powered by batteries, and the batteries hold X amount of charges. And once you're out of charges, you have to recharge it. And until then, it's done. Which is kind of like an elegant solution that Brian Colin came up with in that game that I really enjoy. The fact that like it is a limited resource at the time, but like it's not a forever limited resource because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, can you get back to your ship and plug your batteries in a couple hours you'll be good to go. But up until that point, you do have to deal with the like, oh, am I going to have enough
Right.
power to, for my pulse rifle or my laser knife?
And for both the GM or DM and the players on the other side of the screen too, incorporating like scarcity of any kind in D&D, whether you say it's like arrow, whatever, feathers for arrows or whatever you want, food, water. You can then those things become a reward too, right? So like instead of you can give out more rewards. It's like sure, we get magic items and experience or boons or whatever, but like, hey, sometimes it's like, wow, you survived that adventure and there's like enough food to last you a couple days now. Like
Yeah,
as you have to go back out into like the, harsh tundra or whatever.
you're not going to have to figure out which of your adventuring companions is going to get eaten first.
Yeah, right.
And next thing you know, the curse of the Wendigo.
Yeah. And I guess, that's like what you mentioned earlier, 5e, D&D especially, and I've mentioned this a little too, is like there's just almost all of your cool stuff comes from within. So it's
Did
hard to
you
take those things away and make them scarce because like everybody can like good berry or forage or, just create food or they don't need to eat or whatever.
did you play Dark Sun?
Yeah, for sure.
So and like Dark Sun, it was like it listed how much water every like all the different
Hmm.
races needed, and so you had to carry it with you in order to have it, and like heat exhaustion, and like at
Hmm.
a certain point you're like, oh, this is just a lot of math. That's not really that fun. So
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like somewhere where those rules overlap with like engaged players is the fun, right?
yeah,
Where it's like, you take those things and, you want to overcome them and stuff, but they also like realize what it means for the character when they have these mechanical things. Like, yeah, that's helps me role play think like yes I have -2 to whatever but it's because like we just trekked across a hot desert sand for like 8 hours so yeah it's like you're really tired and you don't want to be in the heat and everything like that if you play in person speaking of Dark Sun and Water in particular many time chat guest Robert Uducci long ago I think it was on the chat actually or maybe it was when I talked to him for a website interview but yeah, what he does with, and he's a huge Dark Sun. He's got a cool podcast and everything about it. Is use like glass beads, in person to represent like the party's food and water. And he said it was really cool because seeing those actual like he would take them away and stuff like that. It does like help increase that tension of like we only got like 2 glass beads left of water. It's like we had 10 when we started. This is really low. So just seeing them going down in front of you on the table, I always thought that was just a cool little tidbit if you play in person to use some kind of visual representation, especially.
yeah.
Or
So
even if you play online, you can probably get some kind of like hourglass or some sort of visual thing that shows like here's you only got this much longer, then you're gonna start getting like exhaustion,
I
whatnot.
feel like a game like Cypher might be a cool way to kind of like have those style games because instead of it being like just like you've run out of food or you don't have those things, like they would be the GM intrusions.
Yeah.
Like, oh, your rations are spoiled or you've run out. What are you gonna do?
Hmm.
And then and of course, like the fun thing about Cypher, or one of the fun things about Cypher, is you can choose to take the intrusion or you can kind of buy off the GM.
Hmm.
So like they can hit you with an intrusion, and if you have the XP to pay for it, you can be like, no, actually, I've got a spare set of rations in my other pants or whatever.
Right. Yeah, and that makes me think of like incorporating that kind of stuff into 5e. And again, a lot of this is just like the buy-in with the group if you want to play like
Yeah.
that. And I always have to tell myself, especially me particularly, it's like my default playing style this day is like 2 to 3 hour, sessions, either one shots or like just a few adventures. So getting into that stuff would not be that fun because it's like you're playing for 2 hours and like you spent an hour of it like looking for berries because you're starving to death. Doesn't sound that fun to me, right?
Nah.
But
When we were
you
younger,
know,
it seemed a lot more fun.
Well, man, I played for like 8 hours straight too.
Yeah.
But and there's probably I'm sure it touches on this in the DMG. But I mean, you can make surviving in a scarce environment as simple as the daily D20 roll, and it's like, if you roll a one, then it could be like a GM intrusion sort of thing where it's like, well, today I get to decide what happens, because you didn't find any food. Like everybody has exhaustion, or everybody's like poisoned for the day or whatever,
I guess
fatigued.
the one of the things that makes it hard in 5e is like because there's not a ton of mechanics to represent negative effects. The ones that are just super harsh.
Yeah.
Like even like one level of exhaustion is it's far more brutal than you think because
Oh yeah, for sure.
we played the Middle Earth game. A guy ran a
Hmm.
session of the Middle Earth game, and you have to go through the journey phase, which the journey phase is like this basically complex skill challenge, right? Where
Sure.
this whole concept of scarcity can very well come up if you roll poorly or you don't have rolls filled, and
Or you
we
just
can
didn't think to plan ahead, just didn't think to do that kind of stuff.
yeah, and
Like
we
get
can
food.
be moderately okay
Uh-huh.
on the that phase of the game and still all walk away with a level of exhaustion. And
Yeah.
so now like we're trying to solve puzzles and figure things out at disadvantage for everything. And then when a
See,
fight
yeah.
does break out, initiative disadvantage.
Well, and what I like those kind of games if that's what every, like it's a play style, right?
Yeah.
Like that is going to make things much more challenging, but much more like realistic in some ways too. And you know, it sounds to me like that's just not your, like when you enjoy your escapist fantasy, that's not necessarily a priority or something that
No,
you
not
find that fun,
anymore.
right?
I feel like
Yeah,
the real world tends to be scarce and harsh enough without it
sure.
intruding into my fantasy world.
I
Or
do and I don't. I mean, you could certainly have a whole campaign about that, but it's funny. Like again, I've mentioned it many times. Like our Tuesday night games, I've just learned like so many different, like, or had so many insights about gaming because I've never played like that before with the same people, but rotating DMs, right?
uh,
And I'm thinking like, when we were doing those bastards, and there was a few sessions where we like crossed a desert, right? And it's like, it's just how much you want to zoom in and zoom out depending on your group and what you like to do. I mean, we basically crossed a harsh desert, like several days journey, and like, just like as fast
a
as I just
montage
said
and just
that.
happened,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, right. Or yeah, or it isn't even a montage. Like, okay, you're there.
Yeah.
But you could certainly like get into, keep zooming in further and slowing down the pace as much as you want.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Like, oh, there's a sandstorm coming, or you've got
yeah,
scorpions in your
right.
water, or whatever happens in the desert. I
Mhm. Or
don't
you
know.
just, you went all day and you're hot. One interesting thing or two, kind of related that are mentioned in like official D&D content related to scarcity is the scarcity of coin
Uh,
as a possibility, and I think it was in one of in Barovia maybe, just because it's like there's not even that many people there, and
so like all
and then
pirates.
expanded on in Van Richten's guide under the like making your own domain of dread. One of the questions you can ask yourself is like, what is scarce in your domain, and that can kind of like inform like, and so then what are the kinds of things that people would like go really far to get, whether it's like murder other people or crave power over whatever, just because like they don't have that there.
I makes me
So
wonder too, like the coin thing. It's like if there's not a lot of coins, does that make them more valuable or less valuable? Right? If everyone barters
it's an
for
interesting
stuff,
question.
if everyone barters for stuff, will they care more or less about it? Or would like so you're like, oh, I can pay you with this gold for that, and they're like, well, what am I gonna do with that? How about a sheep?
Yeah.
You got a sheep? I could use a sheep.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a a currency system at all assumes that there's like some sort of bank and government, right? Otherwise, it's like people would just barter because like I can't eat gold,
Yeah.
you know, right?
Yeah, or it'd be a thing of the uber wealthy, right?
Yeah,
Like for them it's convenience, but like the peasantry or the common folk, they're gonna be more or less like, well, you give me the gold, then I have to take the gold and go do something with it to get what I actually.
Right. I always thought it was cool that on Kryn how gold was not only scarce like it is in the Earth, it was just like nobody really
Yeah,
cared
steel
about it the
pieces.
same way. So steel pieces, yeah, was the currency because it's like, well, I can use steel, so it was, people use it as currency, and if the bucks literally stopped with you, where you're like, I actually need the steel, you just melt it down and make something out of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing that I guess me and Ted were talking about the other day. It was like the idea of like you always see some people bite the gold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're testing it to make sure it's real.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can definitely mess with your players. If they go into a shop and the shopkeeper brings out a scale and weighs their coins, like the gold pieces are kind of arbitrary, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
about the gold, right? And different realms would mint different coins. Some of them might be big, some of them might be small. But what about the merchant that shaves them,
Yeah.
or the merchant that has his scale rigged?
It's kind of interesting. I just thinking about it now that gold is sort of like the standard. It certainly doesn't have the same value as in our world because there's a lot more of it. It's not like, does everybody have gold pieces lying around? I don't even have any gold at all in my whole house, right? And even though it's like a lot, in relative terms, it's still like the common denominator.
So
In D&D world, it's like there's it's like there's a lot more gold. People have gold jewelry and coins, and there's like dragons with just hundreds of thousands of coins. Who minted them all? Where do they come from?
yeah,
But to be back on topic, like even a rising scarcity could be a plot hook, in your campaign. Like when you were saying like they were weighing the coins,
like all the boats are
it's
stuck
like
out
maybe
in the harbor and they can't offload them, so no one can get the stuff that they need.
yeah. Um, maybe they're like being minted less valuable than they are. So it's like a huge, like nobles are manipulating the economy, and they're like, look, there just isn't that much gold, so we started making them smaller. But then, like down at the common person level, it's like, yeah, well, you're kind of screwing us because
Yeah,
it's not worth as much, so I'm not getting as much for my gold.
I think you just incorporated our supply chain problems and inflation into
Well,
D&D.
those kind of things when you boil it, like strip away the details, can make relatable, fun things. Even if like players don't explicitly catch on that, like I wasn't, intending it to do that myself just now, but it's like it's somewhat relatable. Like, hey, that's bullshit, and in a game, it's like I can do something about that.
Yeah, I mean, and you can have fun with it too, right? Like the
Sure.
ships aren't coming in. Why? I don't know. This dragon turtle keeps sinking them
Yeah.
all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's still a fantasy game, so you have a whole bunch of crazy
Yeah,
tools to build your, you know, an
Eh,
analogy with.
yeah. So you could definitely have some fun with it. Aaron B, what about scarcity of land? The oceans are rising, races fighting for space. Like, yeah,
That's
I mean, anything like that, like anything that creates tension.
mm-hmm, for
Um, and
sure.
and and the thing that's fun about those kinds of problems is that gives the players multiple ways of solving it. Like, I don't know, do they defend the land that's being encroached on and they deal with the scarcity by eliminating some of the people, or do they do it through diplomacy and figure out a way for everyone to coexist? Do
Mm-hmm.
they figure out a way to raise the lost land of Atlantis and create a whole new place for people to live? Turns
Right.
out
That's what I was gonna
Atlantis
say.
is
It's like
cursed, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. When you got those fantasy elements, it's like players are pretty creative, and you have lots of different spells. Maybe they like travel to the center of the planet and like speak to the spirit of the planet, like literally face to face, because it's not like just some hippy dippy new age
open a
philosophy in
portal
their
to the
world. It's like no,
elemental
there
plane of
really
water.
is like gods. What's that?
Open a portal to the elemental plane of water and drain some of it off.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
right, right.
A lot of bags of holding.
Yeah. Another what else is cool about like incorporating scarcity, like Aaron B mentions too, it's like there's not necessarily like something to blame, but it still creates that tension. So if you like
Yeah.
those kind of games where there is like gray areas and like you just said, it's sort of like, well, there is no easy solution. So how do you want to deal with it? It's like
Yeah. I
if you
mean,
have a bunch of murder hobos, they're like, well, if we can just, get powerful enough, we could like lay waste to like, thousands of people at a time. And,
or maybe there is, right? Like maybe like the Sahagin are, setting up crystals in your Arctic,
Mhm.
melting the polar ice caps. And
Yeah.
like we're just gonna wash away the land dwellers and everything will be our
But which
kingdom.
is a totally D&D thing to do. I mean, again, it's like
Yeah.
they're aquatic creatures. So flooding the planet would love that. It's like I'd
Or
never go on the surface anyway. If it was all underwater, we'd have so many more caves to swim in and kingdoms to build in
yeah,
them.
and if you want something less sciency and real world politicky, I guess you could also just be like, they could be opening a portal to the elemental plane of water instead of draining it off. They're letting it in
Yeah. Or the elemental plane of fire. Oh, you mean to avoid like the melting ice? Yeah,
to
sure.
flood it. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, in your guys' planet, isn't the Arctic is where our equator is, right?
yeah, yeah. We have a very
So
close
that
equator.
melting would just, kind of be interesting in that way. I mean, not much different, I
I
guess.
mean, in our original cosmology, we've thought about this way too much, but it was like it was like a giant planet, but instead of having moons that rotate around the planet, it's got small suns,
Oh, okay.
and then,
That's
so there's
cool.
two suns,
Sure.
so that's why, and they don't quite hit the center, so that's why
Yeah,
they
yeah, that's pretty. I
pull
actually
them
never knew
down.
that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
thought
the
about it.
Airbnbs goes on, for lack of land could lead to sailing and flying cities for sure. Just the
Definitely
same as
water
lack of
world.
anything. Interestingly enough, another place that's mentioned is the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron. And so just I found it interesting only because it's like mentioned from an in-game perspective. It was talking about like the availability of magic items because Eberron's such like a highly magical world with like low magic, and it just mentioned how the availability is based on scarcity, like of those particular things in the setting at the time, like so just kind of like the idea. It's like, yeah, sure, there's magic shops all over the place and ways to get them. Sometimes it's like, yeah, there's just we haven't been able to get any drift globes in a while, which again could just lead to more adventures or more scenarios for players to insert themselves with. Why not? Is there something holding them up? Is there a drift globe manufacturing factory under attack?
Well, also like in Eberron specifically, you had the Mornland
Yeah.
as well, which I don't know if they made any like new rules for that. Like, but I know like in third edition, it was very problematic because like I don't think you could heal when you're in the Mornlands.
Oh, geez. Wow.
Like yeah, like you'd find like
So there's a
bodies.
scarcity of healing potential.
Yeah, you'd like find bodies, but they they would still have the wounds on them.
So it's like time's just stopped in there, sort of.
Yeah, except for like you still like, I guess there's still the consequences, but like the bodies didn't rot. It was just like
Yeah, yeah.
weird. But
So regardless of what kind of scarcity, whether it's like you know food or resources or healing potential or whatever, do you prefer that there's like more of a mechanical component in the game to make things interesting than it just being like something that the group role plays?
well, I think if you're going to do it, you kind of need to do it.
Well, here, let me give you an example. So using like food as an example, right? You could plan ahead and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna go buy like supplies and food and everything, and maybe that's as far as you go. It's like, okay, you took care of it. But if you don't, there's certainly Goodberry and Outlander backgrounds, and that accounts for them too. But then if they don't, or they just don't happen to have those things available at the time, then it's like with the right kind of group would just sort of like create their own adventure. It's like, well, what are we going to do to get food these days? So, today or whatever.
Yeah, I think like
There's just that interplay with the DM of like, well, what's it like around us? It relies on a lot of player agency, I guess.
we had a DM that wanted to run a Dark Sun like game
Okay.
for us. And like you're going to use like stone and bone weapons, just like you would in a Dark Sun. But there was no drawbacks. Just like they might as well have just been the regular.
Oh, they didn't like have the potential to break and stuff
Yeah,
like they
and
did
some
in
of us
Dark
were
Sun.
like, "Well, what's the point? Like that's not really that's not really Dark Sun." And that was part of it, like knowing that your weapon could shatter when you use.
Yeah.
Or the other thing was like finding a steel sword in Dark Sun was like finding a magic weapon.
Yeah, right.
So
Which is its own kind of scarcity too. And I thought it was fun, as a kid. It's like, well, when your weapon breaks, it's like then you're in a desperate situation, and like now I just have like a jagged piece of bone that used to be like my great bone greatsword or whatever, right?
yeah, so I feel like there should be some. I think there should be like mechanical consequences and rewards for playing that
I
style
guess,
of game.
yeah. I guess I see what you're saying, and this is like a fine line between like you should just play another game that's designed that way.
Yeah.
But I do think those things are in D&D. But yeah, to address what you're saying too, it's like I think it's good to use all of them. Just like say you wanted to have like weapon breakage be a thing, right?
Yeah.
Then just focus on that. Like, you don't have to have like that, and it's hot, and you're out of food and water, like, and you have to travel without animals, things. It's and not like it, not in a way of piling. I mean, just like the coolness of it gets lost because you constantly be managing that stuff, right? Like,
yeah, and
if it wasn't one thing, it'd be like, my weapon broke. It's like, well, your weapon broke, and now you got to hunt for the day. Oh, we didn't find food, and it's like because we didn't find food, now we're exhausted. But like if you just went with like weapon breakage, I think that could be more exciting because it's like, make your rules so that it happens not all the time, but not barely ever, so that it creates those cool moments.
I mean, or if you're playing those style games as a GM, I think you could have them all, but maybe I don't highlight them all at once.
Right.
So it's just like
which again, like it probably is better in games that like there's longer sessions, and you're probably gonna play like a lot of sessions if it's like unless you just did like a 12 session campaign about that. Like this campaign is about getting from here to the other side of the desert and surviving the trip, which would be great. I think that's a great campaign premise. And then to just play something like that, maybe on 12 sessions, but to just do your campaign like that, I think you could really highlight those things more and then sort of like montage or downtime the thing between sessions. Like maybe the premise is like, your caravan guards in a world of scarcity, right? So it's like sometimes you just got to get to that, or bounty hunters or whatever, but like each little chunk of campaign is sort of self-contained. And the next time it's like maybe you're in the Arctic, and it's like, okay, now we can play with like the Arctic survival rules. So you got to do this in this amount of time.
Yeah, and also too, like
now I want to do that
that aren't necessarily as bad too. Like, for instance, if you're like, oh well, resources like food and water are scarce.
Mm-hmm.
And using like the caravan or traveling to one place to another, instead of being like, oh, you're gonna have exhaustion, we're gonna deal with exhaustion for the next like 3 hours of gameplay, right, which may not be super fun. You could always go, okay, you arrive at your destination, but you're like 12 hours behind schedule or a day behind schedule because and maybe there's consequences to that, like you miss a deadline and now you have to track down the person you were originally going to meet, because they're not at the rendezvous because of that reason that they were late. Oh, Brian says I'm a little low. That's what you were saying earlier. Son of a monkey's uncle.
Yeah, those Yetis are sensitive too. It's like you just touch it a little bit, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'll try and turn up my gain.
That sounds good.
That sounds good. Yeah, it might even just be like the way it's turned, and if I'm like not talking directly into it.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, again, that's like we say it many times. It's like that's why it's good to just have a session 0, which to us, there's a lot of definitions. That just means like just talk about the campaign that's to come and what everybody's expecting and think would be cool, and then whatever discussions spin out of that. That's my idea of a session 0. So yeah, like I would pitch like, I want to run like a desert survival thing where like you have a goal to get across the desert, which a lot of stuff can happen in that, but it's like I want there to be like you have to deal with the heat and breaking weapons and food.
So Aaron B brings up let's see, lack of gold versus someone kidnapped the goddess of fertility, lack of birth types ideas. I feel like that might be like the bachelorette paradise, maybe, depending on what you want from life. But no, like that would be very interesting, and I do like the idea of using some kind of scarcity in the beginning of a game to kick off the adventure. I feel like that one, like the fertility one, seems a little harder to me. Because like unless you want to get dark with it and be like everybody's being stillborn.
Yeah, that
otherwise
right.
it requires more time.
If you mean like animals and stuff too, it's like cattle and domesticated animals, that would be a major problem.
Yeah. I mean, just not people, but also animals for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at the halfway mark. So it's at this point I want to do some show and tell because cool came in the mail. So we got a couple Strixhaven books here.
Nice.
And also
Curriculum of Chaos, is that what it's called?
Yeah, Strixhaven Curriculum of Chaos. Basically, did you ever want to play Harry Potter but D&D? Is what I kind of feel like.
Many times.
I was never really a pothead. Was never really.
I got totally carried away by those in my 20s. I read them and I was just thinking like that would be awesome if you were a kid and somebody just showed up like, yep, you're a wizard and you're rich and come with me. There's a whole fantasy world. I was like, take me.
I mean, me and Ted are close to the same age, and Ted was really into it, and you were into it, but that never grabbed me. I guess I always just viewed it kind of as like kids' books.
Oh yeah, they were. I just remember being, just feeling like a kid reading them. I'm like, yeah, these are just fun.
But so I was gonna say, well, I mean, if you guys are familiar with the channel, like I got a couple of these books, Ted has a couple of these books, so generally they're gonna go in the giveaway pile. So we have a giveaway every month, and if you're a member of the newsletter or Patreon, there's a good chance that you could win the giveaway.
Wink.
Yeah. Also, I think we also have a thing on the website where you can fill out a form. I don't know if we still do that.
Mm-hmm.
Do that?
Yeah, I think we do. Yep.
Yeah,
pretty sure.
There's a couple of different ways you can actually, submit to be, one of the winners for a monthly giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's believe $50, $100, a couple $100. It's all
I think the standard line is at least $50 MSRP, but it's usually much more than that. I mean, just one of those D&D books alone is like $49.95 at retail. I think that looks pretty cool. The adventure, I mean, I like to see that they're doing different things and structuring them in different ways, just like how we were just talking. It's like it's all about that structure of which
there's a bunch of high CR monsters in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah,
they're probably the heads of the colleges, but hey, they stat them.
They're dragons, right? They're dragon druid, a dragon wizard. So
I'm only I'm mostly familiar with Strixhaven from the Magic sets, and so they don't really get too much into the lore. I just see, but
Oh,
yeah,
so
there's like I don't know what all the heads is, but
I
one of
haven't
them is a
read
dragon.
much. I just got them today,
Yeah,
but like the world is it sounds like, oh, the world was made. There was dragons. They had magic. They felt the only way for other races to have the magic too is if they taught it to them. So they started a college. So like each of the, I guess I don't know if there's 4 or 5 colleges,
I think there's 5.
and each one has a progenitor dragon,
Okay.
which is a dragon, but also a spellcaster. So
Well, there's no scarcity of dragons in Dungeons and Dragons anymore. That's for sure. There's an abundance. We just talked about that last week. They
yeah,
are
yeah, for
really
sure.
leaning into the dragon lore, which they should. It's like it's in the name, and it's there. I mean, dragons are featured. I mean, they always have been in just about everything, including Dark Sun. There was the dragon sorcerer kings and stuff like that, right? Were they all dragons, or was there just one that was like, or was there like capital D dragon? I don't remember exactly from Dark Sun.
And no, like, so the dragon was a mythical creature that you had like you transformed into, and like the uh was it Prism
Sorcerer
Penhead
Kings. Yeah,
was the first series.
yeah, that was the 5 book series with the
Like
noble
that
guy. And,
culminates. I mean, spoilers. That culminates with the one trying to become a dragon.
oh, okay.
And Hamanu at some point actually becomes a dragon and like wanders the way. So they're not quite unique, but very close. There's not
Okay.
many of them, and like I feel like they would make Taras look kind of weak.
Yeah.
Is the impression
Yeah.
that I got? Yeah.
Sure. So, do you have any sort of like bucket list or games that you'd like to play or run that incorporate scarcity into them at all? I know
Man,
I
I feel
do.
like right now I'm getting a good mix of that from from the Vasgrim game I'm playing, which I'll be playing Wednesday again. Like
Mm.
the very first session, our ship gets totaled. And we're like, and
Awesome.
we're on a planet, and we're like, if we want to get off, we have to find another ship.
That's a fun game.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't the GM's plan to have like all the worst stuff that
Oh,
happened
really?
in
The
that
ship
game.
blowing up wasn't the GM's
All
thing?
the worst things that have happened in that game, and the weirdest things had nothing to do with the GM.
Well, that game's sort of flavored and designed to, be sort of like nihilistic and stuff. So, the couple of times I've played, that's how I felt. So it's like, whatever. I mean, you're assuming like the universe is dying and stuff. So have fun with it.
Yeah. So, Chris, to answer your question real quick, there are 7 chapters. 4 of them are adventures. So there are 4 standalone adventures that could also be a campaign. Each one of them is its own chapter. So there's a decent size for monsters. There's a decent amount just about the school itself and a bunch of the NPCs, which I always think stuff like that can be super useful, where you can
Mhm.
just pull that stuff out even if you're not playing it, and you're like, oh, I need this particular type of NPC, and that book might have those in there. So I find that useful as well. There's some new spells, a couple feats, a race, and 5 new backgrounds that are like Uber backgrounds, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So we'll be shooting videos on it, I guess probably Wednesday, and so the following week maybe we'll start putting out videos about it
Mhm.
as we are wont to do. Yeah,
You
so
know. Oh,
I
sorry.
was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna say like the Vast Grim game, like my character's the pilot, and
Uh-huh.
I'm terrible at rolling dice, even though my character's not bad at being a pilot.
Okay.
And like OSR games, I feel like there's definitely more dice rolling for stuff. Um, and his patented maneuver is always the corkscrew. Uh,
Sure.
I had a giant space spider on the ship, so I tried flinging it off,
Oh,
and
nice. Did it
and
work?
like crit failed.
Oh, really?
And then like I think we even
Oh, is that
like
how the ship blew up?
that is how the ship blew up.
How'd you guys get off of it and live?
Well, it blew up after we got out, like we crash landed. Uh,
Oh, but trying to do that caused you to crash.
yeah, yeah,
Ah, okay, I got you.
and then later one of the other characters contracted a worm,
Uh-huh.
So it was one of the brain ones. So the other character performed brain surgery to remove it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
It went pretty well. I mean, thankfully, the other the one with the worm and the one without the worm, they were both doctors, so
Oh,
they were able to figure it out, and it worked out.
nice.
So far, like our
The
most competent character in that game is like a janitor bot.
yeah,
Yeah. So
I felt pretty yeah. In fact, the character I played was just like he had no specialty. He was just like happened to still be alive, sort of thing.
yeah,
Survivor, I think, is what it was. But I had
in
like a
Vasgrim,
pulse
that
rifle.
is the special thing, still being alive.
Yeah, yeah, that was it's like well, you made it this far, so yeah. But it was sort of like the doomed kind of thing, like in Cipher. It's just like you got no skills or nothing,
Yeah.
but once in a while you get lucky and don't die when you should have or something. I think was what a special power was.
Yeah, but
Um,
I feel like games like Vasgrim and Morkborg probably lean pretty heavily into like those kind of games where there is a lot of scarcity and
mhm.
there is an abundance of stuff. So when you do find something, like I know in the one game we got excited because we found a bunch of batteries. They weren't charged, they were drained, but there was like a dozen of them. And we're like, oh, this is gonna be so good eventually.
Yeah, oh, yeah, right. So that's a cool example of how scarcity is fun, where it's just like man, these just getting depleted ones was like, oh my god, this is awesome. If we get 6 hours and as many battery chargers as there is. Um, the game that Ted's going to be running for you guys, I forget which exact group, could definitely incorporate scarcity, and I'm going to keep trying to pitch on the player buy-in narrative power of scarcity too, being a seafaring type game on a ship. He said you guys wanted to have a ship. And it's like, well, I mean, if you're at sea for a long time, it's like potable water and food and all that kind of stuff can drive the adventure. And I guess I mean in the sense of like even before they become mechanical drawbacks, like if the DM's like, okay, well, you've been at sea for 2 weeks and you guys have no food, what are you going to do? That sort of thing. Or maybe somebody sabotages it, or like it got
Until we get to
moldy.
second level and can create food, can create water. So or third level,
Yeah.
fourth level. Aaron says, "I hope the janitor bot doesn't go all HAL 9000 on y'all." Well, funny you should mention that because he does keep mentioning the fact that I destroyed his forever home when we flew up the ship. So
Um,
we are probably going to all get murdered at some point by the janitor bot.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
yeah, I guess. Oh, go
so
ahead.
one of the games that I'm pitching is like that too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I have to get. This is the last pitch I have to put together for the new session. It is just call it Under the Dome, and it's kind of
Oh yeah, you've
inspired.
been talking about this for literally years.
Yeah, it's kind of inspired by the Baldur's Gate descent into Avernus and like all the vehicles and war machines. So it's going to be kind of steampunky, post-apocalyptic, and the idea is there's these pockets of civilizations that live under these crystal domes that protect them from the chaos storms that are raging outside. But they still go outside to scavenge things, and also, most of their technology or magitech stuff is powered by the chaos, the remnants of the chaos magic, so they bring stuff back that has absorbed it, and they put it through this process, turning it into something called the grind, and then that's going to power their vehicles. It'll power like if we use which we probably will, we'll probably use some kind of like firearms and stuff. It'll power
Mm-hmm.
all of that.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, so like the idea that they might be scavengers that go out into the waste, and then another one is where
See,
so
that's got a narrative buy-in of where it's not doesn't have like a lot of mechanical things, just driving the narrative, the fact
yeah,
that
well
things are
maybe I
scarce.
don't know, like maybe they run out of grind, maybe they have to figure it out, like
Yeah,
so there. I mean, you can use plot devices to do some of that.
yeah, right. I mean, you're the DM, you
Like
can just
that.
do that at any time. Just be like, oh yeah, that supply of grind that you thought you have, it's gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Your food, worms, rock
Yep.
clumps.
Yeah. And it could be any number of things that could have been stolen. I mean, there's extra, like maybe boggles, like just, don't they have they can open a portal and reach their hand through
They
another
do.
one in distance? Like maybe they just stole all your stuff while you're sleeping or whatever.
You got boggled.
Yeah, right.
That should be a term for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you
so
could
we like
totally.
a couple of the games we've coming up might have that as well. And then also we're gonna be playing Shadow of the Demon Lord, which I heard is kind of like a brutal game.
Mhm.
So I don't know if any of those elements are in that, or if it's just that there's a lot of fatalities.
Again, there's just too many things in D&D. I mean, I guess if you wanted to make it, and then this is again why like just talking as a group is important. Like a cool thing in your game, then you would just say like, look, let's just all agree that create food and water is not an available spell,
Yeah,
right? And it's just like just something like that, as easy as that. It's like you just can't pick it in Goodberry,
yeah. Like in Dark Sun, like those spells were hindered. Like
right?
you could take them, but they didn't do what they used to.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Like
Even then, maybe it
you
just
create water,
reduces.
and it's like wringing out a used rag, right?
Yeah, 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 right. It's like it's like maybe it'll just be silt or
Yeah.
something. It's all silty or whatever.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and that kind of goes back to Brian Smith had said, question certain schools of magic, particular spell would you feel would be more flavorful or scarce, and I might even do that. I might do like a spell list that is
mhm.
restricted in in that particular game, or
Yeah,
maybe you can cast it, but maybe the duration it doesn't last as long. Like you can
right,
cast Goodberry, but they don't last 24 hours. They last an hour or something, so you have to use them right away.
right.
So yeah, you could play with things like that as well.
I've always wanted to place or run a just a cold weather like Arctic game where it's just
Yeah,
like
you just wanted to
survival
brag.
in the cold was
You just want to
important. What's that?
brag, everybody. I know you.
Well, nah, a lot of it's just from watching Game of Thrones and thinking not
Yeah,
so much like they watch your cool like black leather clad rangers, but just the fact that like realistic problems in the cold seem fun to explore to me. Where it's just like
like once you get completely suited up, you're gonna immediately have to pee.
yeah, right. But I mean, it's just cold. It's like so wearing plate mail armor like that isn't the best choice there because it's like well that is going to be cold. Like the metal would be cold and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And it's like, it's just not, practical and things like that. I just find that kind of stuff interesting. So, like, having heat and something like that, you'd probably like, if you wanted to curate that, like, maybe same thing with like fire spells. It's like create bonfire would be pretty, it was a pretty bad cantrip because it's just like, boop, anytime, you're fine.
good to go. Yeah.
Right.
Well, like you said, maybe things like that have a reduced effect, right? They're not as
Yeah,
effective, or
right.
the duration, is not as long. I don't.
Scarcity of Gold, Brian Smith mentions would be fun. It seems like most people, or most of the time, I see people lamenting that there's nothing to do with gold, which
Yeah,
I've never seen that problem in games when I'm a player or ran. Like
yeah.
players,
I think I just feel like when that happens, I just feel like maybe you got boring players
yeah.
because, like, you know,
I mean, if you just do like dungeon crawls or like classic style traditional adventure where you're like at the dungeon or whatever, then yeah, money gets old pretty quick because there's just not a lot to buy. And back in the day, we did track ammo and all that kind of stuff. Um, so maybe they could solve a lot of things with the one stone in the sense of like even in your traditional style D&D game, you in 5e and you want to make gold and stuff more you know useful, then like maybe you do start incorporating like wear and tear on equipment so that when they come, it's like you do have stuff to what do you call it, spend it on. But yeah, in 5e, it's because characters just have so many more inherent powers that are free, easy, or cheap to
yeah,
do.
yeah. In
Not that that's a
previous,
bad thing. It's just like whereas back in the day you would have had to like homebrew stuff to make the game more exciting and action packed, like having action points or whatever. Now it's like the other way. It's like, well, they have to take things away to make it like it used to be. That's just that's not the system's fault or the players who like either way. It's like you just can't have it. It's got to have some chassis, and that's the one it chose that your players just have
I
a lot
know
of
Chris is
inherent
trying to get me murdered in your Arctic game. D&D
power.
meets the thing. Maybe Dave is Kurt
Isn't
Russell.
that basically what Frost Maiden is?
I think there's some inspiration taken from there.
Yeah, there's like one of the secrets is like you have a Slotty inside you or something like that.
I felt was Kurt Russell Escape from New York?
Yeah, he was in that Snake Plissken.
Yeah, I always felt like Kurt Russell every time we did a job in New York, and I had to leave because just leaving New York and going over the GW bridge was so terrible.
He felt like Snake Plissken every time.
Except for it's just like super boring.
Let's see, what is it like?
And super slow, sitting in traffic.
Yeah.
Although I will say, during the summertime, it was not pleasant.
I'd imagine that.
And those guys out there with the bottles of water made a mint, I'm sure.
Yeah. Because refreshment was scarce. That was what was valuable.
Yeah. So what are you drinking tonight? Speaking of refreshments, you don't usually go over your drink.
Yeah, nobody asked. It's Pink Apple Lady Kombucha, my usual beverage of choice. Not this kind, but just kombucha. It's bubbly. It's good for your gut health, which is a very important kind of health for you.
I've got plenty of gut. There's no worries there.
No, it's like they say all the bacteria and stuff in your gut's like really important for your health.
So, how would you anticipate running like that Arctic game, the Tundra game?
I mean, again, it's just.
Would you pitch?
I just like the idea of like simple things are much harder to do. Like I said, like just getting to the next town. I wouldn't just hand wave those things. It's like going through the dark woods is dangerous because it's like, well, it's dark, it's cold, it's going to be colder because of that. Again, and I also just tend to like lower like tier 1 and 2 adventures where it's like a pack of wolves is dangerous thing.
Well, I mean,
until somebody casts like conjure animals or something, that's just like, oh, that was.
As we've seen with druids, that is dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess I hate to say it, but I probably would just play a game that was designed like that because there is too many things like that make D&D a lot more like fantasy superhero than like like slow burn, like action sort of stories with like down on their luck heroes and stuff like that, right? You know what I mean? Like I think there'd be too many mechanical drawbacks that it wouldn't be fun for players,
right? Or
because a game that's designed to be scarce, it's like it's going to have those things, but it's not like, the scarcity just makes all your characters suck more.
Unless you're like the rogue or a barbarian or a monk.
Yeah, right.
Who doesn't need stuff.
Yeah.
I totally get that. Although, I've talked about this encounter before where like one of the more traumatic experiences was being attacked by in an evil forest by flying squirrels. That actually happened in during the winter. So all of our characters were like all bedecked in furs with big weapons. So like that was part of the problem with getting them off of us.
Yeah, it's tough.
I think we had to. I think we resorted to like rolling in the campfire and stuff to try and get them off.
Yeah, it's a hard sell for today's gamer, I think. Right. Like scarcity with like severe mechanical things with drawbacks. Because it's like,
I mean, when we first started playing, it was like expected. Like even just regular D&D. It's like your DM was going to make you track your ammunition. They were going to make you track your
Rations.
and so like I don't know, like years later, we actually played with like Scott Garibay, and he said something to me that was like, you know what, that just makes sense. He's like, I'm not making you track this, and I'm not making you track that. You're playing 10th level adventurers. By this point, you know exactly what you need, and you have it with you. And that was always the thing. And like we didn't articulate it that way, but in many videos, one of the things me and Ted have constantly talked about is like we play these games once a week or once every other week, and for a couple hours we get to be these characters, right? But in theory, in essence, right, those characters would be them all the time. So things that we're not thinking of as players,
yes,
the characters they're lived for them. So that like really punitive style of gaming that DMs used to do made zero sense.
Right, like it was like, well, you didn't say you bought rations before you left for the 30-day journey. It's like, do you think they would just walk out of town with like, oh, I guess whatever, maybe I'll find a PB&J tree in the wilderness.
I didn't say put my pants on either, but
right. I guess, again, it's kind of like just a group consensus thing where I think there's that middle ground of it being like a theme or something to say. I'll put it this way. It's like if you talk in your, say you pitch like, I'm going to play like the Dark Sun and, your weapons are going to break and all that. And sort of like incorporate the idea, like you said, where it's a GM intrusion, not like, when you don't do this, X happens. Like, no, just the fact that like when bad stuff happens, that's sort of like the grab bag of DM stuff that I'm going to be reaching into. Like if we played with our Tuesday night group, it's like, I wouldn't care if like it was like a crucial moment. You're like, your sword broke. I wouldn't be like, this MF and DM like screwed me because now I don't have a sword. It's like, well, I know you're not trying to kill me. It's probably going to be challenging from then on until you replace it. But that's what's fun to me is like dealing with challenges and trying to overcome them in a fun way more than the mechanical stuff of like that means you got a -2 to all your attacks. It's like that's what Rustman is usually for. This is different.
Well, also too, like it always depends on how you use it as the GM.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're just using it to penalize the players all the time, that's not fun. But if you also are like, oh, the ogre stabs at you with his bone spear, and you dodge out of the way, it hits the boulder behind you and shatters.
Yeah.
And now they don't have the weapon, and that happens occasionally too because you crit fumbled as the DM and you're using bone weapons, or even like maybe you have special rules. If you crit with a bone weapon or a stone weapon, it destroys the weapon, but you do like quadruple damage or something.
Yeah.
As long as it goes both ways and there's give and take, then it's a lot more fun. But I've definitely played with DMs or just use it to bludgeon the character with.
And that what you just described sounds like totally something you'd remember for a long time too. Like, I remember that ogre like threw its, jabbed its spear at you and it missed and then shattered. And it's like, if it wouldn't have shattered, he totally would have killed us. But because of that, it made it, just makes it more exciting, right? And then it's like maybe even your sword breaks and you like just jab your jagged piece of obsidian into its neck, just put it, slay it for good or whatever. I think that stuff's fun for sure.
So, Comrade 2261, a creature I never used because I have no idea how to create the creature, stats, and my voice. Pardon me, guys.
Puberty, man. It happens to everybody. It's natural.
Gotta wet the whistle there. But creature stats and all that stuff, but hinted to my players about it. Past was a Tarrasque that was controlled by an Elder Brain. So honestly, like now we have the Elder Brain Dragon. So I feel like that would be a good template to look at and be like, well, how did they do this? How can I extrapolate these stats to from a dragon Elder Brain to a Tarrasque Elder Brain?
Yeah. Let's see, Brand Smith said, it's just like a movie. Yeah, it's sort of like what we touched on before. You have 3 hours. What do you want to focus on? Right. Yeah. It's just like, how much do you want to zoom in or out? Yep, for sure.
And for that, every group is going to be different, and
Hmm.
it's just a matter of coming up with a consensus among you and your friends that everyone is going to have fun with.
Yes.
Like, I think the days of the GM just springing these things on the players are done and over with.
Yeah, but there's no
Hopefully,
scarcity of other people to play with too. So it's like, well, if you don't
yeah,
like, I mean, a lot of times it is your friend, but it's like if it's not, or even if it is, it's like, yeah, still be friends. I just don't like playing D&D with you, and there's a whole lot of other people that you can find that have the same, perspective as you.
So
And
Parks as a DM denied characters sleep for a few days in a game. Man, that would be a tough situation. It's been a while since I played in a game where like the players were kind of doing a forced march. But I know it has happened, but just not in 5e for me.
mhm.
Constitution saves, baby.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, with that being said, it is just 1 minute past the
Yep.
hour, so it's that time to wrap things up. But we'll be back tomorrow to play some fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons here on the channel. Stephen Partridge is an awesome dungeon master. We're playing all Nerdarchy homebrew subclasses, so you can check that out. As well as Wednesday, I will be on the Infinite Black channel playing in the Vasgrim game, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of great players in that game, so you can check that. And of course, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday we have the daily live chats, so you can come and chat with us there as well. Today was a little different. Today's person was they play D&D, but also they're a personal trainer and fitness coach, so they
Hmm.
do nerd fitness. So you can catch the replay of that. I found them because they were like doing training routines and fitness routines with a mace. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so I thought that
Oh,
was
that's
kind of
cool.
cool.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.